Welcome to episode 9, I think, of Soul Care with Stevie Boy. We're looking into the book of Philippians, this letter that the Apostle Paul wrote from his first imprisonment in Rome to his friends in the city of Philippi, a city up on the northern coast of Greece. And last episode we looked at the beginning part of what Paul said his prayer for the Philippians was. It begins in verse 9. Let's look at it. This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Now, I look at this and think there is an amazing structure to this, where one phrase builds upon another and builds upon another to create a whole idea, a very big idea. We looked at last time the idea that your love may abound more and more. I didn't mention at that point that the word here for love in the Greek, that's the language Paul originally wrote in, was the word agape. If you've been around church for very long, you probably heard a lot of talk about agape. It's God's love. It's completely altruistic. It's unconditional. There is nothing about it that serves itself. Well, there's another little aspect of the word agape that I think is very interesting. In terms of what we have surviving today of ancient Greek writings, the New Testament is the only place that we find this word agape. It was a very, I don't want to use the word typical, but it was a word that was only typically used by Christians. And there's a reason for that. It's because only the God of the New and Old Testaments is capable of this kind of altruistic, this kind of unselfish, this kind of perfect love. If you, in these days of isolation and confinement and quarantine, have a lot of time on your hands, and you have a dictionary nearby, I want to suggest a very good book that lays out a huge, wonderful understanding of the word love. It's a book written, in the 1940s by my hero, C.S. Lewis, and the title is The Four Loves. There were 4 words in the Greek language for love, and agape was one of them. He does a masterful job of unpacking what do each of these 4 words for love have in common and what are their differences, and it gives an amazing depth of insight and understanding into God's love, agape love. Now, that to me is a little bit interesting because the second piece of what Paul is praying for, that their love, agape love, may abound more and more. It's a very intensive kind of statement, so that you may be able to, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that we come to have this grasp, an intellectual grasp of the love of God, so that, here is why, there's a purpose, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. When Christ returns, there will be a reckoning. And I don't like to think about this very much, and partly because it's very I won't say disturbing, although I'm tempted to use that as the word. It is a little bit disturbing to realize that my life will be under review. Here's the good thing. What God is looking for is not my achievement. He's not looking for my intellect. He's not interested. I don't think he has a high level of interest anyway in my IQ. I don't know that he's going to be looking into what I could have done if only I had. What he is most interested in is right here in this verse, that I may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. That is a big, tall order, to be pure and blameless. Of course, pure and blameless aren't difficult words, and yet they are. Pure. Ivory soap, used to be the illustration that they were 99 and 99/100% pure. And really what that means is they're not pure. In order for something to be pure, it has to be 100% pure. Wow, I can't do that. I'll never be able to measure up to that. Blameless means without blame, so that not only do people not blame me, but they can't blame me even if they wanted to. Okay, I'm not there either. I'm pretty sure you're not either. What I am so grateful for is the idea that God makes me pure. He makes me blameless because of what Christ has done and is doing in my life. He is purifying me. He's creating in me a more and more, I hope, daily, more and more blameless character. Well, this is all part of what earlier we looked at in beginning in verse 3. I thank my God every time I remember you, and all my prayers for all of you. I always pray with joy because of your partnership with the gospel from the first day and now, until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. God has never stopped working to bring his plan to completion, and he will not stop until the day of Christ. Quickly, there are at least two ways I see the day of Christ. One is there will be a moment in time when Christ will return. The skies will split and roll back like a scroll. They'll be rolled up like a dirty garment, and Christ will descend. The book of Revelation has him descending on a white horse, a war horse. And across his thigh is this saying, Lord of Lords. He will return as a conquering king. I think that will be certainly that will be the most cataclysmic day of all in all the world. I think for every Christian, we ought to be longing for that day. Now, I'll be honest with you, I have not always longed for it. When I was younger, I was afraid of it. I mean, deathly afraid of it. Because I always wondered, when he does that, will he take me or will he not? Have I been good enough? And that's a question you have to settle. I'm grateful and glad to tell you that the way to settle that is that if you said yes to Jesus on his terms, he is faithful even when you're not. And you don't have to fear his return this day of Christ Jesus as this last day of earth. And there's a second way, and I almost experienced this second way. We will experience the return of Christ, I believe, when we die. I believe that when a person dies, their awareness in time ends, and then it begins. It's almost like a flip. their awareness of eternity. And for them, when they died, I don't have a verse and chapter for this, but it to me stands to reason that when a person dies and truly dies, then they are stepping out of time and into eternity, and they experience that Christ has returned. Well, and really honestly, you don't have to believe that. If it makes sense to you, I'm glad to give you a little something in that. But since it's not a central point in the whole gospel story, you can believe it or not believe it. But I do know the day of Christ will come for all of us. And I love the fact that God will continue to do what he began in us until that day. I love it that Paul's prayer is for us to be pure and blameless until the day of Christ. And then he says, filled with the fruit, this is verse 11, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Christ Jesus. And that's huge. Filled with the fruit of righteousness. The Bible, several places, uses fruit as a metaphor for what God does in a person's life, for the product of God working in one's life. In the book of Galatians, Paul writes about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. All these things are the fruit. They are the product. This is the produce that the Spirit of God working in a person's life will produce. And now he uses it here for the Philippians and says, filled with the fruit of righteousness. What does righteousness produce? Well, self-righteousness produces pride. But real righteousness, one of the things it produces is humility. So how can I look at the righteousness of God, his absolute, pure perfection, moral perfection, and then look at my own life and not be humbled? Real righteousness, part of the fruit of righteousness, would be humility. I think another fruit of righteousness has to do with how I treat others in our relationship. A person who is producing, who God is producing a fruit of humility in, tends to relate to people around them in a much, much better way. I love what C.S. Lewis wrote about humility. He said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. I think that's what is one of, if not a primary fruit of righteousness. Well, this fruit of righteousness doesn't come through my own effort. This is not about me trying harder to be righteous. Paul writes, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. I just keep coming back to this over and over and over again, that Christ is growing in me, developing in me his character. To whatever degree I am partnered with him and cooperating with him as he produces his character in me, well, it makes sense that the fruit of righteousness will be produced in me through Jesus Christ. And then here's what the ultimate goal is: to the glory and praise of God. Here's why I think that's important. You know, I mentioned to you that the fruit of self-righteousness, in my experience, the primary fruit of self-righteousness is pride. When people are producing, or they believe they're producing, righteousness on their own, they're very prideful, and they enjoy receiving the acclaim and glory for their own righteousness. But this kind of righteousness, the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, look what it does: to the glory and praise of God. It isn't me anymore. It isn't about how good I am or how hard I've worked. It's about God, for his glory and for his praise. I'm going to drop it right there because I'm at the 15:02 mark, and I'll pick it up next time. I hope to see you then on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.